Well, good morning. Go ahead and turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17. That's 1 Samuel. That's Old Testament, if you don't know. And just to let you know, we're in a sermon series about Rock My World. We're looking at some folks in the Old Testament. This is going to be the last sermon that we have in the Old Testament. Next week we start New Testament passages and also New Testament characters where God, Jesus, just really rattle people's pages and get them to think differently. Now, while you're turning, and just as encouragement for those who heard our ladies this morning and just thought, I met somebody going back to the restroom as they were wiping tears out of their eyes because of your testimony. Let me just say, if you want to hear more, there is a banquet on the 13th of September. We need to RSVP by the 1st. Yes. And here's what I'd like to do. I would love to take an entire table at least. If we can go to Ruby Tuesdays and get 15 people to go, then surely we can fill up 2 tables at $15 a piece. There might be a discount on that. And go and just hear, a ton of testimonies. This will really just move you about that ministry. So let me know after church, and we'll get something coordinated. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now this is a well-known story to almost all of you. There's probably very few who haven't heard this story. It's David and Goliath. And how many of you grew up in church learning that in a Sunday school classroom with some little old lady about just this side of 200 years old? And it was flannel graph. Remember flannel graph? How many remember flannel graph? It's amazing that technology has practically disappeared, right? But there's David, and he's always a little tiny guy. And Goliath is always a great big guy. He's always a giant. And just to let you know, for the story, at this point, David has already been anointed king of Israel. The truth is, by this time, by 1 Samuel chapter 17, he's probably 19 years old. He's called a youth in Hebrew. We translated it as youth. But that would have been a young man who could have been fighting at this point. But he's not. He's home taking care of the sheep. So you got the background a little bit. Let's go ahead and look at 1 Samuel chapter 17. And I noticed as I was looking at my notes that somehow I deleted about 4 or 5 verses. So the screen will just suddenly not be on the same page I'm on. But we're going to read the first 11 verses. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. And they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah. So they're actually in the territory of Judah. And he encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes-Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in a line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side with a valley between them. You got that? The great valley of Elah. You go there, it's a beautiful valley. It's just, somebody's been there. It's very, very beautiful. And it's pointed out, the reason this is famous is because David fought Goliath here. Now, so they're standing on these mountains, a valley between them. And verse 4, and there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, 9 feet, 9 inches tall. He's not a little boy. And he had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had a bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of the spear was like a weaver's beam, and the spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And a shield bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel. Okay, you got it? Big guy, standing there. He's all decked out. He's ready. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle?" Why'd you guys show up? Right? Why did you show up? The game's over, basically, is what it's saying. Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? He's actually insulting them. Aren't you just a puny bunch of slaves to Saul? And so, why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Or are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man. You know, just somebody, any men out there? Give me a man. And that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were what? Dismayed and greatly afraid. So I wanted to just start here. I'm actually, that's the last of our text that I'm going to read. I'm going to refer to the rest of the chapter. There's 58 verses here. And we know this story so well, I just thought a review would be pretty basic. We could kind of figure this out, but I really urge you to read the rest of the text because there's some real treasures in here. Just David's, David shows up. He's the youngest son of 8, remember? And his dad sends him there. His 2 oldest brothers are fighting in the army. And Dad says, hey, send them some lunch, and why don't you come back with proof that you, number one, did that, but, basically proof that they're still alive. And so David shows up, and here's this giant. He comes out. And David's a little, well, he's trying to figure out why the Israelites are all, at this point, they're afraid. We're afraid, they say. And he's just shocked. I mean, he's really offended that this is going on. And he makes a point of hey, you guys are Israelites, you're the people of God. He's just a Philistine. He's a nobody. Why isn't somebody going out? And of course, they all answer him, and they say, well, if somebody's brave enough to go out and fight him, then you get the king's daughter, you're going to get all kinds of awards, there's some money in this for you, but basically none of us are going to do it. And this 19-year-old boy is so bold that the word gets back to King Saul. And it's kind of interesting because apparently Saul and David already knew each other, but you see some lapses of memory on Saul's part in this passage. He has to be reminded at the end of the chapter who David is. And you would think he already knew him because David's already been in, singing in his palace. So there's just a few things to just make you go, but it probably says a lot about just how much the cheese has slid off the cracker in Saul's life, He's just not quite all there for some reason. And so David's brother hears about David and his boast. You remember what happens in that? He gets chewed out by his older brother. He says, why aren't you out taking care of the sheep? Now, David had made sure that there was a hired man that took care of the sheep, but isn't it interesting that David gets chewed out by his older brother for even showing up at his father's command, and he doesn't defend himself. But then, remember what happens next? So Saul sends for him. He goes to see Saul, and he says, I'll fight this guy. I mean, hey, he's just a Philistine. This will be easy. 19, 9'9". And so Saul says, okay, we'll go and fight. And remember how that goes? He tries on Saul's armor, and it's too big. He tries on all his armament, and it just doesn't quite work. And David goes out with just the clothes that are on his back. And it says he goes to the river and he finds what? 5 stones. Now most of us tend to think of river rock, and you just kind of think it's going to be 5 little stones like this. He probably did find river rock, but this is what kids over there use to this day for their slings. And this is a sling. It's not like, you know, those old things that, how many grew up with this? John, you still have yours, don't you? I'll bet. See? No, it's not one of those little things. No, this is, it goes on your index finger, and you have a loose little line that you let go of, but you have this great big rock. Now, what a shepherd boy would do over there is they find a rock and then they chip it off, and they chip it round. But apparently David didn't have time to do that, so he goes down to the river and he finds himself 5 smooth stones in the river. That'll work. Now, that makes sense if you got hit with that, wouldn't it? You'd think you'd at least, Layla's got a black eye. Did you know that? She got hit with a golf club, but she's still with us. Now remember, this 9-foot 9-inch giant gets killed by one rock by David. I think there's a story there. And here's the story. You got it? Fear, fittings, and faith. So let's look at fear, first of all. How many of you deal with fear in your life? Yeah, I mean, there's hardly a day that goes by where you don't deal with the fear. And you know, there's a lot, aren't there? As I was thinking about fear and just some of the fears that we deal with, I was thinking about health crises, and I was thinking about, you know, financial challenges, those great big giants in our life. But then, I think this was a God thing. And you all just helped me illustrate this morning. Now, when Sarah asked you to do your testimonies the first time, was that scary? Yes, see, they agree. Was it scary the first time you did it? I got to thinking about fear. And so, fear, faith, fittings, and faith. So go ahead and go to the next screen, which is fear. Maybe not. Go to the next screen. Does size matter? Okay. Think about fear this way. How many of you right now would quake in your boots? You would shake like the Israelites if Pastor Rick were to ask you to open us with a word of prayer. Apparently not. You're all just, you're giants. I was thinking, how many times I've seen that deer in the headlights look. Surely, well, maybe you didn't raise your hand because you're afraid I would ask you. How many did not raise their hand because you thought I would actually ask you? See, you know, isn't that a big fear? Isn't it the fear of speaking in public? That's a big fear, isn't it? Dakota, was that your first time? No? You've done this before? You still forget. How old are you? 23? Wow, 23 years old. She did a great job this morning, didn't she? Yeah. You know, the size matter? Yes, it does. But it matters right here. Because a lot of times those fears that we deal with, if you really get past the event, haven't you discovered that there's a lot of fears that we have in life, and once you get past the event, all of a sudden they're a whole lot smaller. And so I think there's a couple of reasons for the story. One of the things I struggled with as I was doing study, there's two different versions of this story in the Old Testament. One is the Masoretic text that we have. And in the Masoretic text, Goliath is 6 cubits in the span tall. However, in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation in the Old Testament, he's only 4 cubits tall. And I thought, do I really want to introduce that, Lord? You know, we've settled on the Masoretic text, and so he's 9 feet 9 inches tall as opposed to 6 feet 9 inches tall. But I wonder if we don't need to know the story, then maybe Goliath just wasn't all that big after all. Maybe we need a little bit of encouragement that as human beings, you know, sometimes truly our fear just outweighs reality. And so, was the text changed at some point in the past? Was he really 6 foot 9 inches tall, or was he really 9 feet 9 inches tall? You know, I don't think either one matters in the story. Because the truth is, David was the only guy in that crowd that knew it didn't matter how big Goliath was. He just knew that he was on God's side. So size does matter, but mostly right here, and it's our perception. And in David's perception, Goliath wasn't all that big. You got that? And keep in mind, it was still intimidating. It doesn't matter how tall he is. His javelin was like a weaver's beam. So think about this big around. So that by itself just weighs quite a bit. The spearhead weighed 15 pounds. His coat of armor, which was, it would have looked like scales. It would have been little bronze plates that were just like a snake's scales. Would have been scaled over. Just his coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. I don't care whether he's 6 foot, I think 9 foot 9 inches tall, because in order to carry around 125 pounds of just what's on his back, that's significant. But then to have a javelin that you could throw that's this big around, and then it's got a 15-pound point on it, he had to be a big boy. Yeah, right. I was talking with Elliot. We're talking weight loss right now, and I said, "You got to. I'm not exaggerating. There was a day back in the day, 50-inch chest, 38-inch waist, but that's because I was lifting concrete like this all day long, and just throwing this grate up all day long, so I looked like a Greek god. I did." Just that's when I won Suzanne over, and then 40 years later, this is what she's got, right? So maybe giants just appear this big initially, and then no. But let me show you something next. See that? Well, no, like he went too fast. Anybody know who that is or was? He died in 1940. He was born in 1918. He was only 22 years old when he died. That's Robert Wadlow. That's his family with him. He's 8 at the time this is taken. He's 8 feet, 11.1 inches tall. He had just a couple of years earlier surpassed the then living tallest man, who was 8 feet 4 inches tall. Both of them living in the United States, by the way. So there really have been giants. 8 feet, 11.1 inches tall. Rest of the family, next screen. Now that's he and his dad. That's not Photoshopped. That's, number one, they didn't have it in 1940. But that's he and his dad. At this point, he's 6 feet 4 inches tall. His dad was a respectable height. He's 10 years old. Talk about fear. Leroy, is that boy yours? How tall is he?
Pretty good.
I don't know. Yeah.
He's like 6'2.5", 6'3".
Yeah, isn't there a point when did you have one of those children that started to grow, and then, particularly for us dads, we've been intimidating them with our size, and then it reaches the point where they get to be bigger than us, and so all of a sudden, can you imagine poor dad here, 10 years old, and he's thinking, this boy can take me. By the way, in the previous picture, he weighed 490 pounds.
Wow.
Yes. Yes, 490 pounds. And, this is real. I mean, there are people, and there have been people who have had that sort of height. So again, I'm big on the idea that Goliath probably was truly 9 feet 9 inches tall. Can you imagine that? And then here's 19-year-old David, which an Israelite back in those days, he would have been not a real big fellow. And he goes out with this and fights Goliath. And by the way, everybody thought he was crazy. Everybody thought David was the crazy one. And here's the irony. David thought everybody else was crazy. Who was right? David. Right? So are you starting to get this? So here's the truth about fear. The truth about fear is mostly it's right here. And do you have it? Here, let me give you just a few. Here I think are some of the big fears that we deal with in our walk with Christ. Little things like, what about tithing? What about giving 10% to the Lord? But man, you've got this stack of bills over here. I mean, that presents a big fear, doesn't it? I've got to give to the Lord, but I've got all these bills, and if I don't pay them, somebody's going to come down for me, right? How many fears did you guys deal with? I mean, really? And I loved your testimonies this morning, because one of the things I've discovered is there's a fear of dealing with reality for most of us. Yeah, I got it. You want an amen on this? And so guess what? You know why addicts or alcoholics self-medicate? They can't deal with reality. That's true, see? So they're saying, yes! Yeah, believe me, I've dealt with a lot. The truth is, they're fighting fear, and it's easier to shoot something up your arm, or snort something, or smoke something, or drink something, than it is to deal with reality, because there's a fear right here of reality. What's your fear? The truth is, your fear is probably bigger than it really is. And so, let's look at the fittings. Now, fittings, by the way, is armor. You got that? So fittings is armor. I just want to remind you of a part of the story here. David is offered Saul's armor. He actually tries it on, which is what a lot of us do in life. We try these new things that come along, and we kind of figure that's going to help us. But David had enough common sense that when he went out there, he laid aside the armor, the sword, everything else that, I mean, you're talking King Saul. I'm guessing as king of Israel, Saul probably had some top-notch stuff, don't you think? He had the best. I mean, if you're going to get a computer nowadays, don't you think the king's going to have the best computer? If you're going to have a bazooka, the king's going to have the best bazooka. He's going to have the best car, all those things. And what does David do? He lays all that aside, and he goes out there, and he gets the thing he had used all his life. So, what's the principle here? If you're going to deal with fear in your life, and if you're going to think about equipping, don't forget God's been in a training program for you all your life. However old you are, it took you that long to get you to where you are right now. And all the things that he gave you in life were the very things that he meant for you to use in life. So just use them. Just use the things that God's used in his training program. You know, I deal with this a lot of times with a lot of preachers. One of the big complaints about the conventions that we go to, and you know, one of the ones that gets picked on is the North American, but that's not all of them. As a matter of fact, I was having a video conference with a lot of preachers this week, and they were talking about this big conference, Grow Conference, down in Louisiana. And there's a guy there, I met him this year at the North American, 50,000 member church. They've got 18 different locations. He was an excellent speaker. He did a great job. But one of the things that the preachers walk away with is all these things are for megachurches. And you take and look around, there's not 50,000 people in this room. You might have thought that, but there really aren't. If you got up to speak, you might have thought there were 50,000 people in here, but there really aren't. And so the big charge is, well, there's nothing there for me. Well, no, I don't have a 50,000 member church, so there's some of that stuff I can't use. But there is some of just the basic principles that I've learned in life, in sales, before, in construction even, just dealing with people. And there's some of those principles that I can take and I can use, and they work today. But, you know, I'll tell you one thing. Aaron Chambers was talking, and he went to this conference, and he says, one day the guy just called up Bluebell Ice Cream, ordered 2 of their great big giant trucks to show up, and they just gave away to this massive conference with thousands of people there, gave away ice cream sandwiches. And, you know, just made the phone call, hey, Bluebell, can you bring some ice cream? 2 trucks is not going to show up. We might have a guy out there with a wheelbarrow. That might, no, actually, I'll probably be carrying one of those little 6-pack. And that's my offering, you know, hey, bring us some ice cream sandwiches. How many? 10. That's what I can afford, right? What's the lesson? Use what God's given me. And that's all I need. I don't need all the bells and whistles. And obviously, if you can fell a giant with a sling, it works. Now let's look at faith. This is the big. You know, when David got out to that field, and he's watching what's going. Actually, he's on the mountain, and they're looking down in this field, and this big giant comes out, and everybody else is scared to death, including Saul. The biggest giant in that valley was Goliath for everybody. Everybody. Except David. The biggest giant in David's life is God. And one of the things that we need to remember when we're dealing with fear, when we're dealing with the giants in life, is the truth is, just make God the biggest giant in your life. You got cancer? If God's the biggest giant, and He is your giant, even if the worst happens, isn't it the best? Didn't somebody in the Bible say something like, to live is Christ, to die is gain? And so even if the big C comes up, and that's a big giant in a lot of our lives, isn't it? If you've got Christ, what if you got the fear? Your biggest giant is going to welcome you with great big arms. Amen is right. So make God your biggest giant in life. And here's a big, have you ever watched, how many of you participated in football games in high school? Have you ever noticed that, particularly in high schools, both the high schools are praying for God to make them win? Have you ever thought about that? Isn't that kind of things that make you go, Okay, so both of them believe in God. And they're both praying that they're going to win. You know, and of course the non-Christians kind of point that out and they just say, really? Well, who's going to win then if they both believe in God? We like to think that God's on our side. But actually the thing we need to make sure that we know is we are on God's side. Right? Because it doesn't matter really how the outcome goes. The truth is, if we're on God's side, then we can truly make our plans get big. Because God is on our side. Okay. There's something else that David did. I'm going to ask the guys who are serving to go ahead and get back to the table, because we're going to do communion at this point. David, before Saul, is getting grilled about everything that's going on. I mean, he's grilling him. And he says, you're just a kid. You're a 19-year-old. This guy, Goliath, he doesn't point out that he's a giant. He just says, he's a man of battle. He's been a man of battle since your age. And you're going out there, whippersnapper, and you want to beat him? Yeah, whippersnapper. And so David just says, well, I've been doing this for a while. I've been watching these sheep. And then when a bear or a lion comes and they attack the sheep, they carry them off. I just go out there. I love the way he describes it. I grab them by the beard. I grab the bear by the beard. And basically I whack him over the head. But I've used the sling to just knock him out. And so I know it works. So when Bill let me know that he couldn't do communion meditation this morning, I was thinking, well, this works. Because that's what communion is. It's a review. Who's on your side? God is. How much so? He died for you. And so we do a review each and every time we meet. And we break bread and we drink the cup as remembrance of what God's done for us. Now, if you beat this victory, and by the way, what is this victory? You get to old age, you pass on to the other side. Truly, we talk about passing on to the other side. We beat death. We beat sin because of Jesus. I mean, that's pretty good, isn't it? That's a pretty good review, isn't it? I mean, what else have we got to worry about? Again, in the Bible it says, don't fear those who can destroy your body, fear those who can destroy your soul. And what God has said is, I love you so much, your soul is saved. So I'm going to pray, and we're going to pass the plate. And the way we do it here is, as the plate goes by, please just, go ahead and take the bread, take the cup, put the empty cup back in the tray, and then pass it on to the person next to you. Well, let's do a review of how God has battled your fears. Father, I thank you for this opportunity, and I just pray this morning that as we partake in this communion, Father, truly we do a review. Remember what you have done for us. And we thank you for it. In Jesus' name.